Welcome, folks, to the 17th of January 2024 Aries Working Group call. We have a cool stacked agenda today. Luckily, I'm not talking as much because I managed to come down with a cold in the last couple of days. This is a Hyperledger call, so the antitrust policy and the code of conduct are in effect. The agenda link is in the chat. You're welcome to make any adjustments you would like, including adding yourself to the attendees list or announcements or anything else that would be good there. Anyone new today that would like to introduce themselves? I recognize everyone has been having been here before, but welcome back. Announcements. So we had on our list the bifold meeting that should have happened yesterday to discuss the OWF move. Anyone can report us? Anyone that happened to be there that can report it out for us?
I did not make it, but I did talk to Jason after, said it went well, said it looks like there was no concerns with doing that. Tracy Kurt was there and went over some of the process involved, and it's likely in a couple of weeks they will have a vote of some kind or action to move it forward.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
Any release status or work updates or other announcements we should have on the list?
Yeah, sorry, Sam. I also have a small announcement. Maybe it can be useful for the Aries community. DISA recently contributed a reference implementation of selective disclosure JOT as part of Open Wallet Foundation Labs. So we expect it to be like a reference implementation of the standard in Rust, which is fully up to date to all the recent changes, with the test coverage, everything, and of course we're going to maintain it. So I just put the link to this repository in chat, and also there is a crate published. So yeah, for any project which is going to adopt as the JOT, feel free to use this implementation. It's in Rust with all the corresponding consequences like language wrappers, the speed, performance, and everything else.
Awesome, Alexander. Thank you for sharing that, and I mean also doing the work. But thank you for bringing that up here so that we can be aware of it.
Cred Rust release 0.20 Dev 7 was out today, and that includes all of the support for AnonCreds in W3C format. So all of that code has now been merged, tweaks made. I'll talk a bit about what we're going to be doing with that in a segment in this call.
Yeah, stay tuned. More on
Good
that.
progress.
Excellent. Any other updates folks want to share? Okay, here is our agenda for today. First up, an annual report by Stephen. We've got relevant links, and I'll pass that to him. A quick check-in on the unqualified DIDs progress, where we are and what's next. We will need to adjust some dates. That was anticipated, but we may do that today or not. That should be a relatively quick check-in. Then the aforementioned AnonCreds and W3C format overview by Stephen, and then we have some Occupi traceability VC API stuff by Patrick St. Louis to share and go over. So it's a pretty stacked agenda. Any adjustments that we want to make before we get started? All right, Stephen, I will pass the floor over to you.
All right, thank you. I will share my screen. Oh, I should have had one more thing open. I think it might be open, but I'm sure I could find it since I've been looking at it a lot. Okay, I think I've raised this in the past, and we've talked about it before. Project annual reviews are now part of the Hyperledger culture. So we do quarterly reports, but this adds an annual report with some slightly different content from the quarterly report. I have taken the liberty of drafting And I make it clear this is only a draft, so that everyone who wants to contribute to this can do so without having a blank slate in front of them. So this is the draft annual report for Hyperledger Aries. In it, you'll find each segment as per the template that the Technical Oversight Committee has requested, and then a guidance with information about what content is expected in each section. So you'll see that throughout. Here's links to statistics on things like, so the LFX insights into what's gone on in the project for a time period given. So this is for 2023, 2.5 million lines of code changed, 1,500 pull requests merged, and so on. So comparison of 2023 versus 2022 as well, since this serves as the Q1 quarterly report, I put that comparison in as well. And it shows overall progress. It really is about the same, it looks like, based on the key parameters, metrics I'm looking at are pull requests and contributors. This is where the first reference of agent framework JavaScript shifting over to the open wallet comes in, and that, of course, gets mentioned a few times. So additional commentary in there about things like ariesframework.net and Go just being archived, and so on. Highlighting interesting year as the relationship between Hyperledger Aries and the Open Wallet Foundation continues to evolve, and the digital trust space in general continues to evolve. Maintainer diversity, about the same as it's been over the past year. Adoption information, some statistics there on, for example, Akapi, 500 forks, 300 stars, and 50 million pulls from hub.docker.com. Here is where I got into a trickier part, that is performance against prior goals. Obviously, we haven't had an annual report before, but I talked about some of the highlights in here. One of the things I didn't do, and I think I would be very willing to do so, is now that we're at Akapi and Aries VCX, maybe highlight particular things in each separated out as opposed to general. But it is an Aries project, so there's a balance there of what we want to do. Maybe not so much in this section, but maybe in next year's goals, putting out two things, or calling out additional things that are specific to each of the frameworks. But this came more or less straight from the discussion last week, and with just some adjustments to the text and wording to make it clearer to someone looking in on the project. Sorry, I didn't see what was in chat. Okay, that's that one. Help required from the TOC. Didn't quite know what to do with that in any of the projects, so I will think about that. And then finally, one of the big things that they wanted in the TOC was the lifecycle recommendation. For those not aware, TOC recently changed the project lifecycle to simplify it. So it is now just 4 steps. It used to be a bunch of things with many, many lines going back and forth. Now there is incubation, graduated, dormant, and archived, where dormant is a way to announce to the world, hey, this project isn't getting the support it had been, and so is on the way to be archived. If anyone wants to jump in, please do so. But obviously active, these two, incubation and graduated, are the key ones. Yeah, so that is the entire report. Looks like I've got an extra page in there. I hate that. Oh, there we go. I will post a link. I believe I've already put this in the agenda, but I'll post this in chat as well. That's it.
Hey, Stephen, you glossed over something really quick that's amazing. So
Yes.
maintainer diversity. So the sheer number of code contributions and everything
Yeah.
else during the last year is amazing. But
Yeah.
maintainer diversity here is substantial.
Yeah.
Most open source projects are supported by a single organization with a small number of, um, of outside contributions. And there
Yeah.
are exceptions, of course, like the Linux kernel, but the vast
Yeah.
majority of open source projects are that way. The fact
Yeah.
that we have, was it 18?
19.
19 organizations involved in the improvement and support of Aries is just crazy amazing.
Yeah.
And so I that's worth an underscore in my mind, just because
Yeah.
of how good that is. We have ended up leading Hyperledger projects in maintainer diversity for a long time now. So even
Yeah.
though it's kind of status quo and it's the same as last year, still amazing.
Yeah.
That's what I
It
want to
is.
bring up.
Patrick.
Yeah, just quick question regarding the archive projects. You mentioned .NET and AFGO. The AFGO page isn't marked as archived.
I know.
What's the status? Is it actually archived, or because I see there was
It
some
needs to
merge,
be, somebody just needs to go in and do it. And I've been
right?
meaning to do it at some point, but it's obviously not a priority for me. But I
And what?
still see people going to look at it every once in a while. And so we need to get that done.
Okay,
Um,
because yeah, I know I did that. We just got a project submission, and someone wanted to use AFGO, and I wasn't too sure. Wasn't that moved to Open Wallet Foundation, or was it another one that was moved over?
So what's happened is nothing has happened on these two. AFGO was the most recently worked on. And as late as second quarter last year, there was actually a fair amount of activity on AFGO, but it was
Yeah, I see
all done
some.
by Gen Digital, and Gen Digital has basically walked away from it. And
Right.
so there's been no one to pick it up. Now, this is one where using the dormant state of a project, but this is just a repository, so there's not really, but this is dormant right now, and maybe just an update to the README should be the first thing we do. And then it will go to archived. AriesFramework.net hadn't been touched in some number of years, but people were still working on a fork. And so AriesFramework.net was archived, and a fork was submitted to OWF and accepted into OWF. So there's actually a fork of this from some time ago that had been privately maintained. But AriesFramework.net had not been touched for a few years. So that's the status of those two.
All right. Thank you for clarification.
Yeah.
I want to highlight the need for clear messaging when we update those project readmes.
Yeah.
So, for example, in the case that the fork moved, we ought to indicate that. We should also indicate and link to the Hyperledger status page so that people understand what the status means.
Yeah.
And then when we do that, we should also link to active Aries code bases.
Exactly.
So I don't want someone coming to the AFGO and thinking, oh, well, this is archived. I guess Aries isn't really a project anymore, and not really understanding that we're only talking about that specific code base within Aries.
Exactly.
So
thanks, Sam. Yeah.
It's easy to lose the context and then have someone come off with a wildly inaccurate understanding of what's going on. So yes.
I will highlight, this is a Google Doc for now. This will transition to be once it hardens a little bit, people get some input into it, and time passes. This will go into a GitHub Markdown file, and then obviously be submitted as a PR for people to comment on. As it is now, people are, there's versioning within Google Docs, so people are more than welcome to come in here, change anything they want. We'll be able to see, updates being made, add comments, add suggestions, and so on. So don't be constrained by comments or thinking that you have to get everything approved. If you see something incorrect or something you want to see added, a new paragraph put in, just go for it. And we'll manage it from there. At some point, I will be moving this to a PR, and I'll notify everyone when I do that. I'll put a post to Discord today about this report, the Indie report, and the OnCreds report, all of which are in the same state. And there's still several weeks go before these reports are actually due. So we've got some time to go through them. But I really encourage folks to go through these and put your spin on it.
Stephen, thank you for that work. It's a fantastic looking report and makes us as a project look really good. And I appreciate your work not only on those, but on the quarterly reports as well. Please, folks, take a look. Okay, next topic is the unqualified DIDs transition. And so this is an RFC 793. And I believe the pre-work is done in the sense that that the DID Peer 4, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I believe DID Peer 4 has been merged into Akapai. There are other libraries, of course, but I believe that support's there. Stephen, am I wrong there?
It's certainly in Akapai, so we've got DID Peer 2 and 4 support in Akapai. We discovered a fun little error yesterday that prevents full use, so that's getting fixed as soon as possible. But yeah, support's been added. It's still only in main. It hasn't been put into a release, but we'll put that out there.
Okay. So we had picked, we're into step 1 here. And one of the things that I have realized in looking at this is that the status of this RFC is still proposed. And when the pre-work is done, this should move to accepted. So I will create a PR to change the status of this RFC so that it's clear that we're in step 1. So we had set the target date for the code being updated as December 17th. And that's past now. We're already a month past that. And the target date for deployment of all of this is actually in the end of February. So we still have a month and a half for that. And so there's still some progress to be made. Is there any comments or any other status updates that folks have as it relates to the adoption of DID rotation and DID Peer 4 as described by this community coordinated update?
Maybe just quickly, like what concrete feature will this bring?
This allows us to end the use of unqualified DIDs within Aries projects. That was somewhat of a historical nature. If you're working on a project that does not use them, then that's not of a primary concern. It is worth noting that the adoption of DID Peer 4 is going to be important to add support for it, even if you don't need to fix the unqualified DIDs problem. And also DID rotation is going to help us substantially in the adoption of DIDCOM v2. So even if you don't use unqualified DIDs, it's still important to support DID rotation and DID Peer 4 in the code projects.
And the DID rotation, is it limited to DID Peer, or is that affect other DID methods?
It can be used with any DID method.
Okay, interesting.
And so this allows, one of the useful things here is this is going to allow for the migration off of non-DID COM v2 DIDs to DIDs that can support DIDCOM v2, even if it's DID Peer 2, for example, but like doesn't indicate the service endpoint that's compatible with DID Peer or with DIDCOM v2. And so this is going to solve 2 issues for us. This first one that we're working on is getting unqualified DIDs out of the ecosystem. This should have been done a while ago, but better now than never. And then everything is a DID from then on, a fully qualified DID to be specific. And then it also will set the stage for the adoption of DIDCOM v2.
Awesome.
So that's a great question. These are targets for the community, not just for Akapai. And so we definitely need to consider that. Anyone who wants to come along and be involved in that process. So certainly AFJ is welcome there. And knowing the status of that will be really helpful, as there's lots of deployments that work with both Akapai and AFJ, et cetera. And so that coordination is important.
So Sam, at this point, AFJ has not committed to these dates, is it?
Well, no, and we probably need to update these. I mean, certainly we've missed the code update date, And so that would be great to have that brought up and be able to report back when the community when the AFJ project thinks it can get there for both code deployment and be ready for deploy. Allow for some time for deployments to be updated as well.
Daniel Bloom has got a setup that allows him to see where AFJ and Akapai are, and was going to go back and test and see the status. I know there is support in AFJ for some of these. I just not sure exactly what. So we're going to check on interop directly. And of course, and we've added some tests to Aries agent test harness as well for this.
Oh, awesome.
We'll have those. One of the things also tested this week was reuse. And this was one of the big reasons, of course, for going to out of band and did exchange, was being able to reuse a connection when you come back to the same place and you already have a connection, you can detect that. When using did peer 2 in Akapai, reuse does work and can be done, which is also a big thing. And that's one of the things that's really pushing this, is we want that in bifold, so that we can so that when an issuer or a verifier is establishing a connection, they can use a did peer 2 or a did peer 4 and accomplish reuse.
Awesome. We will continue to revisit this as an important point with looking for updated information that anyone can share. Anything else to touch on today for this? As an action item, I'll submit a PR to change the RFC status to accepted, according to the triggers here. So I will do that. Excellent. Next on the agenda, we have non-creds and W3C. Stephen?
Yeah. I will provide this as a quick summary because I wanted to make sure that the community was aware of where we're going with this. So recall that we've got the BC Gov posted 3 Code With Us opportunities for an on-creds in W3C format, one for an on-creds RS support there, then one for Akapai, and a third one for AFJ. An on-creds in W3C format in RS that DSR was awarded is complete, and all PRs merged, including a few tweaks after, which we really appreciate DSR stepping up and taking care of as we've sort of had discussions about how we want to go forward with this. So as well, we now have sort of finalized plans for how we want to implement these in AFJ and Akapai, because it wasn't immediately obvious what should be done. So we've had a number of discussions. And so what we now have agreement on how interoperability will be done, and then how the use of W3C credentials will be triggered. So the agreement is the following, that the new RFC 80809 for data integrity attachments on issue credential will be used when issuing non-creds W3C credentials. So this new attachment format will be used. That is still a pull request. We'll make adjustments during the implementation, and it may be merged before then, but it certainly won't be accepted prior to us completing the implementations. Timo was good enough to create test vectors for all of the attachments, and these are available in a repository. To give you an idea quickly of what these look like, there's a slight difference to them. Where we had in an offer all of the Indy information, or sorry, the non-creds information necessary to issue a credential, it's now put into a binding method. And so that non-creds information, such as the link secret, the cred def ID, and so on, are in those. If you're using a non-creds, something like an EDDSA proof. So what we would consider a standard JSON LD verifiable credential. You would use a DIDCOM signed attachment as the holder binding. So there's a method for both. This is having this in place, and the binding method being an OnCreds link secret is the trigger to know that, oh yes, that's what I'm getting here. I'm getting in an OnCreds in W3C format. So those are defined. That's what we're going to use for that. Present proof will be using an existing diff presentation exchange format. So we're just finally going to implement doing in an OnCreds presentation request, but instead of using an OnCreds, an OnCreds data model, will be using the diff presentation exchange. And so we expect there will need to be some clarifications at least on how to use that with an OnCreds, and perhaps even some changes to the RFC to support an OnCreds presentations, in particular how restrictions and revocations. We think we will lose some functionality in doing restrictions, so we will be looking at that. And the biggest thing is the concept of a CredDef identifier being a restriction on it is a bit concerning to us. So we'll figure out what is possible there as we go through the implementations. So those are the attachment formats. As far as behavior suggestions, the issuer is the one that will trigger an OnCreds W3C VC issuance by using the 089 attachment with the OnCreds holder binding. So once the holder receives it, they will respond with a request. The holder will respond with a request using the 809 attachment, and the issuer will issue the credential using the 809 attachment. So that's the mechanism that will allow the issuer to trigger sending an OnCreds W3C and the holder realizing. There will not be negotiations in this first implementation. A issuer will assume the recipient will be able to handle it and will error off in some way if they don't know what the heck a 089 attachment is. And so that leaves open the door to future possibilities, such as falling back to an OnCreds, so what's called the INDI attachments, the 0592 attachments, if they get a problem report and things, or the holder can initiate receipt of an OnCreds W3C VC. So that's issuer. On the verifier will simply use a 510 attachment, a presentation exchange, to request a credential, and will do so whether the holder is known to be holding an OnCreds or a non-OnCreds format credential. So they will just send a 510 attachment and then be able to process the result, whether it is an OnCreds W3C VP or another type of another signature scheme on the data integrity proof. And finally, holder behavior. The holder will simply respond to the attachments given, whether the existing 0592, which is an OnCreds legacy, 0593, which is JSON LD, linked data proof format, or the new 809. So the existing ones will continue to work. The new one will also work. And the new one will work for both an OnCreds and non-OnCreds. The holders will send the requested message in the same attachment format as the offer. And I wrote a half a sentence here and don't know what I meant, so I erased it. And then finally, from verifiers, holders can receive a presentation attachment if they get a 510. The only change in behavior is that when they look for credentials that satisfy that presentation request, they can, in the current implementation, they only look for JSON LD1 source credentials. Now they can look for anon-creds ones as well. It doesn't matter how they received the anon-creds credential, whether in legacy or W3C format, they either can be used to construct a presentation to send in W3C verifiable presentation format. And then there's a few things that are out of scope and things that we'll worry about as part of this. So that is the guidance that have been given and agreed to by the teams that are implementing these capabilities. Hopefully that kind of made sense. And Patrick, you have a question. Your hand's up.
Of course, I have a question. So I have 3 points. So I had a play with I saw the wrappers and Python were merged, and I had a bit of a, first play yesterday. So
Okay.
there's the concept of mapping from W3C to legacy and then back and forth. So my question is, how flexible is the W3C to legacy anon-creds? What I mean by this is, let's say I've issued this anon-creds credential and then mapped it to W3C, and I want to add to that credential something like a bitstring status list section, and then I want to map this back to anon-creds when I present. Does the format needs to be in a very specific W3C format, or it's only going to look at certain aspect like the proof and the issuer?
So let's see. That would work, and the credential would go in as normal into the VP. It should work. Again, this is still a bit theory, but the credential should work fine. Things like anon-creds revocation and any other information needed for anon-creds is probably in the proof value.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry. And as I think about it, the verifiable credential that gets put into the presentation will be a stripped down version that only includes the revealed values in the predicates.
Sort of a derived version.
Exactly. It is a derived proof because, of course, it has to be.
Yeah.
And so I believe the status list would be stripped off, would not be included automatically. I'm hoping it. I'm sitting there going, this would be bad if the status list went through. So because the credential does not go in as is, but rather is still a derived credential.
Yeah, I think that's going to lead to my second question. So that's in the case you would respond to a presentation request that expects to have an anon-creds type.
Yeah.
So my second question was, when the holder stores this credential, like when the credential is at rest, does he store it in the anon-creds format or the W3C?
That is up to the holder. But the idea is that regardless of how they store it, so the way storage works is basically you store the blob that is the credential, and then you store a bunch of tags that allow you to search for it.
Yeah.
And so when they store it, they store the blob in whatever format they want to. But they add the tags to it so that they can find it. Once they find it, again, they can take the blob and convert it as they need to for creating the resulting derived presentation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense.
Okay. Phew.
Perfect. And my last, it's more of a comment discussion I had. So you mentioned data integrity, DI. I know currently in NiCAPI, there's a lot of reference to linked data proofs, which is the old term for data integrity. So there's going to be like both coexisting, most probably. So just important to clarify somewhere that is the exact same thing.
That'll be the second pass over it, is to merge those things all together and so on.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
Stephen, a very quick question. I saw proposals are out of scope for issuance. Is it out of scope for present proof as well? Proposals?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so we're not assuming, and I don't know how much proposals are used, so I'm not quite sure what the impact will be, and when I say out of scope, I mean out of scope for the Code with Us implementation. That is not to say it won't be added in the future and so on. I'm just saying for the Code with Us, it is out of scope. So anything you see there that's out of scope is for that level.
Yeah, we just as an FYI, Stephen, you probably know we use it for the EMDT, the mining project.
Yeah, okay. Oh, interesting. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
There's a trailing comment by Daniel in
Oh,
the chat.
yeah.
Is that
Oh, I didn't see that. Let me look. And Patrick has his hand up.
No, I forgot to. Oh, sorry, not the other part.
Yes, I think Daniel's right. LDP and DIP are two versions of a similar standard where they renamed the standard in between. I think that's the way they relate. Daniel,
Right.
would you agree?
Yeah. So it won't just be a matter of changing how we name things. I think
Yes.
it'll be a more substantial change when we get to that.
And in fact, a decision when we drop LDP and so on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Patrick?
Yeah, I have also questions about your presentation. So you were mentioning that basically the W3C exchange begins when the issuer sending credential offer in certain format. So it kind of struck me wondering how come is that? I thought that the the you know when we talk about W3C credentials, it impacts the format of the credential, but this seems to indicate that the credential offer messages or the Aries concept of credential offer seems to be also somewhat impacted. Is that correct?
Yes, in that we need a way to trigger how the parties recognize that the format so it's two parts. One is we need a way to recognize the two are the format that the credential is going to arrive in is legacy format or W3C format. So that's one thing. The second thing is the DI attachment format is more generalized to support any DI credential versus just an on-creds. Like it's not specific to an on-creds. The idea of putting that, the reason Timo put that new attachment format was to generalize it. So in particular, we can do things like send a credential that has both an on-creds and some other type of data integrity proof on it, so that the holder has the flexibility of presenting the credential, the same credential, with a derived and on-creds presentation or a VP of some other type of data integrity proof. So a different crypto suite. So that's the reason for the different, those are the two reasons for the different attachment format.
Right, and I guess so the attachment format that refers to the concept introduced in the issue credential Aries protocol issue v2 credential.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Sorry, yes.
Right, I see.
It's all tied to that, so that the protocol, the back and forth remains the same. The attachment format then drives behavior differences as needed.
Right. Okay, I guess that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry I took so long. Thinking that was going to be a little shorter. Let's jump to Patrick's.
Before we do, I just want to highlight that the link to the slide deck that Stephen presented is in the wiki meeting notes. So if you want to grab those same links and see it the same way, then it's there. And to Patrick.
All right. Let me share my screen. This is the one. All right, so what I want to talk today, it's a little pull request that I've made and some, yeah, I mostly want to get a bit of a discussion going about some endpoints and some functionalities that could be enabled with ICAPI. So I made a pull request with 5 new endpoints here. They are basically this an extension of these new endpoints that we have, the VCLDP issue and verify. So currently with these 2 endpoints, we can issue a credential, verify a VC, and almost verify a VP. There was just a little parsing error on the VP. So initially, I just wanted to address this, but I decided to might as well present what an alternative, perhaps, way of presenting these endpoints. So this is based on the VC API, which is a group that I've been attending for about over a year now. So they go, this is designed to be a non-normative specification for if someone wants to provide an API to manage credentials. So they go over many things: authorization, issuing, verify, presenting. What I'm really interested in is the issuing and verifying credential, as well as proving and verifying presentation. So it's a really simple input-output sort of endpoint that is direct. It's exactly what this tries to achieve. We can see here they have the same sort of field. So you input a credential and some options, and your options, you can have your created, challenge, domain credential status. One of the key difference with the VC API is they don't enable the options of specifying which proof type you want to include. Their sort of philosophy is that each instance of the VC API would be sort of pre-configured with a specific credential profile. However, the spec is meant to be extended. So in the case of the new endpoints, you do need to specify your proof type. The way I've handled this is simply by having a default value, which can be overwritten. So I'm just going to go over the endpoint. So I put some very minimal example that are usable out of the box. So the issuer did I've used is just the example did that you can create with the did create. Most of the difference between the endpoint is in the keys that are used. So if I get my response, they use the verifiable credential instead of the VC proof. So here we have an example of the issuance. So you get a verifiable credential, and then you can sort of verify it. I'll get to the store after. This is something I was curious to get opinions on, and then you can verify. So these endpoints are exactly the same as the VCLDP on the bottom. Now these are the ones that I've added an endpoint to prove a presentation or sign a presentation. So when you sign a presentation, of course, you have your field. You do need a holder in this example. Some presentation exchange don't need a holder, but here, of course, we would need one. And then you input a list of verifiable credentials. So I'll just input the one that I've just made. Then you get your verifiable presentation here. And then finally, I can simply verify this one. I think here's what I want. Yeah. And then when you verify this presentation here, I messed up, I think. Yeah, I have to just do it like this. Did I mess up? What's going on? Like this? Yeah. And then when you verify this presentation, you're gonna get your, all right, so it didn't, probably messed up something. So you get the result for the presentation and for the different credentials of your presentation here. So couldn't verify the credential, missing data. Regardless, trust me, it works. I just did a copy paste error. So these new endpoints use the VC manager that I believe Daniel was mostly working on. For changes, I added a way to, if you want to assign a presentation, it's going to, based on the type of the document you input, it's either going to fetch the issuer key or the holder key to derive the which key to use from the wallet. So that's the first part. Now, the other part I just wanted to showcase before getting into some discussion is the idea of enabling a store, just a really simple, here's a VC, store it. Well, verify it first. It's going to make sure it's the right format. It's going to verify it and then store it. So if we store this, we can store this credential, which will be accessible in the credentials section. So currently, the storing mechanism is sort of limited by the DIDCOM protocol. So you need to go through a DIDCOM exchange to be able to tap into storage. The goal of this is to add a bit more flexibility for implementers and people designing controllers to use Akapai more with other exchange mechanism and more use it as a sort of a Swiss knife for issuing, verifying, and storing credentials. So I tried to present it as best as I could. What this would enable, so the first thing that this project I'm working on is to bring a DIDCOM exchange to the VC playground here with Akapai. I have some work going on for this, so we will bring a DIDCOM V1 exchange, and we could host. I would host at ID Lab a Akapai instance with these endpoints to add a DIDCOM exchange. It would enable Akapai to do VC API exchange as well. And I believe we had a demonstration of a OID4 for VC with a plugin that was demonstrated. So this would make Akapai able to issue with all three of the more mainstream exchange mechanism, I would say. So that's one advantage. The other very interesting advantage is test suite compatibility. So the W3C test suites, they use these endpoints of the spec to test against many of these test suites. And they have the VC data model 2.0, they have the DIDKey test suite, they have the different cryptographic proofs test suite. So when Akapai will want to sort of add these features, it will be able to test against the quote unquote official W3 test suites out of the box without having a sort of controller in between. So I believe this is pretty good feature to have. Now I'd like to just maybe entertain a short conversation about what are the thoughts about these endpoints, especially the storage, the being able to store a credential just by presenting a verifiable credential and so on. So that's pretty much my presentation.
I have a question. Which architectural piece would you be calling these APIs from?
These ones, these
Yeah,
are meant to be, these would be called mostly by a controller. Is that what you meant?
That was the question, yes.
Yeah, so they have a diagram in the VC API. It can seem a bit complicated. So they have a list of endpoints, and these endpoints are supposed to live on different components. These ones live on what's called the issuer service, the verifier service, and the holder service. So they are internal endpoints. They're not meant to be public endpoints. They are endpoints for you to manage your credential. Like you would have a controller calling the issuer service endpoint to sign the credentials. And your controller would be this sort of coordinator. You could choose to expose endpoints on your controller that are meant to be called by external parties. But these endpoints are more for you to manage your own solution. Does that make sense?
So this would allow a controller that doesn't understand anything about the Akapai's API, but rather the standard VC API. And so
Yeah.
it would be like a VC API controller could use Akapai as a backend.
Yes, that would be one way to see it. It just, for me, this takes out some, because there's a lot of feature. When you look at the issue credential v2 RFC, there's all these different steps, and there's like the issue credential is like one of the specific step, and the store credential is one of the specific steps. So this is about extracting these features and making them available so that people can use this to build their solution without having to 100% rely on DIDCOM v1 currently, how it is. And this is obviously for W3C credentials. And I believe this could also be a way to sort of work with the new anon creds in W3C and explore what is possible, and be a way to bring these credential exchange to the community as well. Yeah. That answer your question?
It does, thanks.
So this is meant, the VC API is meant to be kind of a standard across standardized APIs to deal with credentials, and in this case, the code running behind this Swagger, behind the API you are calling. In this particular instance, there is a Akapai instance running. Is it right? But you could technically take Akapai, switch it with something else, and then still have the
like
same
this
API.
spec, there's no code, right? It's just a spec, and you implement the spec by registering your implementation here, and you can see a few companies that have it. And then once you have your implementation here, you just list your endpoint. And then you can run these test suites yourself by tagging the different test suites. So the signature 2020, VC 2.0, there's all these different test suites that you can run. They do take into account, you can protect your endpoint behind some kind of, I think they support OAuth and ZCAP. But yeah, the goal of this is sort of a non-normative specification if you want to provide an API so that different implementation can talk to each other in a sort of standardized way, instead of having to do like a use case per use case interaction.
So Patrick, to bring together the last two presentations, in theory, we could, once this VC API set of endpoints supports handling anon-creds in W3C format, we get all of these capabilities and interactions in the same way.
Yeah, so to put in comparison with the traceability, so the traceability is an extension of this specification, the VC API. Yeah. So they also want, just like these endpoints, to be able to provide the test suite you want to have. They require you to have like status list 2021 or bitstring 2021. So this is about giving like the baseline for these API endpoints and Akapai, and then the controller has a bit less translation to make. And yeah, so, and also, so another component of the VC API is the exchanger service. So this is the component that would communicate with external parts. So this obviously wouldn't be part of the Akapai section, but you could create a sort of an exchanger controller, that would just be meant to be called by external party and just relay have this Akapai that doesn't even need to be exposed publicly. You could have just this Akapai instance reachable on an internal network and just have the exchanger service sort of process the interaction, and you would still have access to these sort of issuing, presenting, and storing feature. And you could use the Akapai storage to store your credential. Because, for example, in the traceability, I wanted to implement the bitstring status list. And since I couldn't just store the credential I've issued, I had to create my own sort of storage. But if this enables me, even an issuer could use the storage here to manage their credential, store their issued credential and manage the status of their credential. Because for me, the wallet, yes, it's for a holder, but an issuer can be a holder in certain sections. Any further thoughts?
Very cool. Worlds colliding. This is good.
I think so.
Yeah.
The VC API group are very, very happy about this. They look for implementations. So yeah. So they have two test suite. They have the official W3C and they have the W3C CCG. So it's important to make the distinction between both of them. So here I think they have a bit more implementers. So the VC API is a CCG work item. It's not W3C, and it will probably remain like this for time being. So these are the sort of exchange that could be enabled through a controller, but I won't get into that today. So yeah, we'll stop the share. Any further thoughts?
Patrick, thank you for that presentation. Very informative. And thank you, Stephen. And with that, we're out of time. Thanks, folks, for coming. Hope your week is a great one. And we will see you all next time.